What happens when 12 children vanish without a trace from a summer camp, and the FBI finds something that changes everything we thought we knew about that night? In 1995, Camp Whispering Pines was supposed to be the perfect summer getaway. Located deep in the Montana wilderness, it had been operating safely for over 30 years. But on July 15th, something happened that would haunt investigators for decades. 12 children aged 8 to 14 simply disappeared during what should have been a routine overnight camping trip. No screams, no signs of struggle, just empty sleeping bags and a silence that seemed to swallow the entire forest. If this story keeps you awake tonight, you're not alone. Hit that subscribe button, because what the FBI discovered decades later will make you question everything you think you know about missing persons cases. I've been investigating cold cases for 15 years, but nothing prepared me for what I discovered about Camp Whispering Pines. My name is Detective Sarah Chen, and I was part of the team that reopened this case in 2019. What we found changed everything we thought we knew about that summer night in 1995. The camp sat nestled in a valley surrounded by dense pine forests, accessible only by a single dirt road that wound through the mountains for 12 miles. It was the kind of place parents sent their kids to disconnect from the world. No phones, no television, just pure wilderness and the promise of adventure. The isolation that made it perfect for a summer retreat would later become the very thing that made 12 children disappear without a trace. I remember standing at the edge of that valley for the first time, reading through the original case files. The wind moved through those ancient trees with a sound that seemed almost like whispers, and I understood why they called it Whispering Pines. But there was something else in that sound, something that made the hair on my neck stand up. It was as if the forest itself was trying to tell me a secret. Camp director Martin Holloway had been running the place since 1982. He was a former Eagle Scout, married with 2 kids of his own, and had an impeccable reputation. The counselors were all college-aged, background-checked, and experienced. Nothing about this place suggested danger. Nothing about that night should have ended the way it did. The 12 children who disappeared came from different parts of the country. There was Emma Rodriguez, an 8-year-old from Phoenix, with a gap-toothed smile and an obsession with collecting rocks. Tommy Chen, no relation to me, was 10 and had come all the way from Seattle because his parents wanted him to learn independence. Sarah Beth Williams, 14, was the oldest of the group and had been designated the unofficial leader of their cabin. These weren't troubled kids or runaways. They were the kind of children who sent postcards home every few days, who called their parents on the camp's payphone to complain about the food or brag about catching a fish. They were loved, missed, and desperately wanted back home. Their families had saved money all year to send them to what was supposed to be the adventure of a lifetime. The night they disappeared was July 15th, 1995. It had been an unusually hot day, with temperatures reaching into the high 90s, even in the mountains. The counselors had decided to take the kids on an overnight camping trip to a clearing about 2 miles from the main camp. It was a tradition, the pioneer night, where campers would sleep under the stars and learn basic survival skills. 26 children went on that trip, along with 4 counselors. They set up camp just before sunset, roasted marshmallows around a fire, and settled into their sleeping bags as the temperature dropped to a comfortable 70 degrees. The counselors took shifts keeping watch, as was protocol. Everything was normal. Everything was safe. Everything was exactly as it should have been. But when the sun rose on July 16th, 12 sleeping bags were empty. Not just empty. They looked as if the children had simply evaporated. No signs of struggle, no footprints leading away from the camp, no torn fabric or dropped belongings. The other 14 children and 4 counselors slept peacefully through whatever had happened, hearing nothing, seeing nothing, knowing nothing, until the morning count revealed the impossible truth. I've studied the crime scene photos 1,000 times. I've walked that clearing in daylight and darkness, in summer heat and winter snow. I've tried to understand how 12 children could disappear from a guarded campsite without waking a single person nearby. The more I studied it, the more impossible it seemed. Head counselor Jessica Martinez was 22 years old and had been working at the camp for 3 summers. She was on the midnight watch when it happened, or at least when it should have happened. During our interview in 2019, she told me she remembered the night being perfectly quiet. Too quiet, she said. Even the insects seemed to have stopped making noise around 2 a.m. I kept thinking something felt wrong, Jessica told me, her hands shaking as she held her coffee cup. But I couldn't put my finger on what it was. The fire was still burning. The kids were all in their sleeping bags. But there was this absence, like the forest was holding its breath. She paused, staring out the window of the diner where we met. I should have checked on them then. I should have counted them, but everything looked normal. The initial investigation was massive. Within hours of the discovery, the Montana State Police, FBI, and National Guard had descended on the area. Search dogs picked up scents that led in different directions before simply stopping, as if the children had vanished into thin air. Helicopters combed thousands of acres of wilderness. Volunteers formed search parties that lasted for weeks. The FBI interviewed everyone: counselors, remaining campers, camp staff, even the delivery drivers who had brought supplies that week. They polygraphed the counselors multiple times. They dug into backgrounds, checked financial records, and followed up on every single tip that came in. Psychics called claiming to know where the children were. False sightings poured in from across the country. None of it led anywhere. The families were devastated in ways that words cannot capture. I interviewed Emma's mother, Maria Rodriguez, who told me she kept Emma's room exactly the same for 15 years, changing the sheets weekly and leaving fresh clothes laid out on the bed. "Every morning I wake up thinking she might come home," Maria said. "Every night I go to sleep hoping tomorrow will be the day." The pain in her voice was still raw after all those years. Theories emerged and were discarded. Some investigators believed it was a coordinated kidnapping, but there were no ransom demands. Others thought it might be a cult, but no religious group was ever connected to the disappearance. The most disturbing theory suggested that someone had been watching the camp, learning the routines, waiting for the perfect opportunity. But even that didn't explain how they could remove 12 children without leaving any evidence behind. As months turned to years, the case grew cold. The FBI scaled back their investigation. The media moved on to other stories. Camp Whispering Pines closed permanently after that summer, and the property was eventually sold to a lumber company. The families never stopped hoping, but the rest of the world seemed to forget about 12 children who had simply vanished into the Montana wilderness. I first became aware of the case in 2018 when I was working on a different missing persons investigation. The files had been digitized and cross-referenced with a new database system the FBI was implementing. Something about the pattern recognition software flagged the Whispering Pines case, and it landed on my desk as part of a cold case review initiative. Reading through those files late at night in my office, I felt the same chill that Jessica Martinez must have felt during her watch. There was something fundamentally wrong about this case, something that went beyond the usual explanations for missing children. The complete absence of evidence wasn't just unusual, it was impossible. In 30 years of police work, I had never seen anything like it. My partner, Detective Mike Sullivan, thought I was wasting my time. "Sometimes people just disappear, Sarah," he told me over coffee one morning. "Sometimes there isn't a satisfying answer." But I couldn't let it go. Something about those 12 faces staring at me from the case files demanded justice, demanded answers, demanded that someone keep looking. The breakthrough came in an unexpected way. In March 2019, the lumber company that owned the former camp property contacted local authorities about some unusual findings during a logging operation. Workers had been clearing trees from the valley when they discovered what appeared to be an old structure buried under decades of fallen logs and debris. At first, it seemed like nothing significant, just the remains of an old hunting cabin that predated the camp. But when the county archaeologist examined the site more closely, they found something that changed everything. Hidden beneath the cabin's floorboards was a metal box containing items that had belonged to the missing children. I'll never forget the moment I opened that box. Inside were 12 small objects: a friendship bracelet with Emma Rodriguez's name on it, a baseball card that Tommy Chen's mother confirmed was his favorite, a hair ribbon that Sarah Beth Williams had worn every day that summer. Each item was carefully preserved, arranged with an almost ritualistic precision that made my blood run cold. But it wasn't just the children's belongings that disturbed me. At the bottom of the box was something else, a leather journal filled with detailed observations about the camp, the counselors, and most disturbing of all, individual profiles of each child who had disappeared. The handwriting was precise, methodical, and absolutely chilling in its clinical detachment. The journal entries dated back to June 1995, weeks before the disappearance. Someone had been watching the camp, studying the routines, learning about each child's personality and habits. The entries described Emma's love of rocks, Tommy's homesickness, Sarah Beth's natural leadership qualities. It was as if the writer had been preparing for something specific, something planned. The final entry was dated July 15, 1995, the night of the disappearance. It contained a single line that still haunts me. "The children are ready. The woods are hungry. Tonight, we feed the ancient promise." Below that, in the same precise handwriting, were 12 names arranged in a perfect circle, with strange symbols drawn around each one. The FBI's handwriting analysis team examined the journal extensively, but they couldn't match it to any known suspect from the original investigation. The ink was consistent with 1995, and the paper showed appropriate aging. Carbon dating confirmed the journal's authenticity, but it raised more questions than it answered. Who had written these entries? How had they managed to take 12 children without being detected? And most disturbing of all, what did they mean by feeding the ancient promise? Further excavation of the site revealed even more disturbing evidence. Beneath the cabin, workers found what appeared to be an elaborate underground chamber carved directly into the bedrock. The chamber was accessed through a hidden entrance that would have been completely invisible from the surface. Inside, archaeologists discovered the remains of what could only be described as an altar. The altar was made of local stone and appeared to be much older than the cabin above it. Carved into its surface were symbols that didn't match any known Native American petroglyphs from the region. The symbols seemed to tell a story, though one that no expert we consulted could fully translate. What they could determine was that the carvings were ancient, possibly predating European settlement of the area by centuries. Around the altar, we found evidence of multiple fires, some recent enough to be from 1995, others dating back decades or possibly longer. The pattern suggested that whatever had happened to the 12 children wasn't an isolated incident, but part of something that had been going on for a very long time. The thought that other children might have disappeared in this same location, in this same way, was almost too horrifying to contemplate. The most disturbing discovery came when we brought in ground-penetrating radar to scan the entire chamber. The results showed what appeared to be 12 small cavities carved into the chamber floor, each exactly the right size to hold a child. The cavities were empty now, but trace evidence suggested they had been used for their intended purpose. I stood in that underground chamber with a team of FBI forensic specialists trying to understand what we had found. The air down there felt different, heavier somehow, as if it held the weight of decades of secrets. The symbols on the walls seemed to watch us, and more than one investigator commented on feeling like they were being observed by unseen eyes. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of our discovery was what we found in the journal's final pages. Hidden under what appeared to be blank sheets were impressions left by writing on pages that had been torn out. Using special photography techniques, we were able to reveal the hidden text. What we found was a list of names, not the names of the missing children, but the names of other children who had attended Camp Whispering Pines in previous years. The list went back to 1982, the year Martin Holloway became camp director. Some of the names were marked with small symbols next to them, the same symbols we had found carved around the altar. When we cross-referenced these marked names with missing persons reports from across the country, we found that 7 other children who had attended the camp in previous years had later disappeared from their homes, all under mysterious circumstances. This revelation transformed our investigation from a single incident to a potential serial case spanning more than a decade. The pattern was subtle but unmistakable. Children would attend Camp Whispering Pines, return home safely, and then disappear months or even years later under circumstances that local police had attributed to runaways or family disputes. No one had ever connected these disappearances to the camp because they happened so far apart, both in time and geography. Martin Holloway became our primary suspect, but there was a problem. He had died in a car accident in 2003, taking any secrets he might have had to the grave. His family insisted he had been a good man who loved children and would never hurt anyone. But the evidence was mounting that he had been involved in something far darker than anyone had imagined. We found records showing that Holloway had purchased the camp property in 1982 for far less than its market value. The previous owner, an elderly man named Ezra Blackwood, had been eager to sell, telling neighbors he wanted nothing more to do with the cursed land. Blackwood had also died years earlier, but we tracked down his surviving relatives who told us disturbing stories about strange sounds coming from the woods at night and children from nearby towns who had disappeared over the decades. The more we dug, the more we realized that the 1995 disappearance was just the most recent chapter in a story that stretched back generations. The underground chamber we had found was old, much older than the camp, older than European settlement of the area. Someone or something had been using that place for ritual purposes for a very long time, and Martin Holloway had either discovered it or had been specifically drawn to it. But our investigation hit another wall when we tried to trace the journal's author. The handwriting didn't match Holloway's, and none of the other camp staff we could locate recognized it. DNA testing on the journal revealed traces of genetic material from multiple people, but none of it matched anyone in the system. It was as if the journal had been handled by ghosts. The case took an even stranger turn when we received a call from the current owner of the lumber company. Workers had reported hearing voices coming from the underground chamber at night, even though it had been sealed and was supposedly empty. Security cameras installed to prevent vandalism had captured unexplained lights moving through the chamber in the early morning hours, lights that couldn't be explained by any natural phenomenon. I visited the site myself one night in October 2019, accompanied by 2 other agents and equipped with full recording equipment. What we experienced in that chamber defied rational explanation. At approximately 2:47 a.m., we all heard what sounded like children's voices coming from the carved cavities in the floor. The voices were faint but unmistakable, and they seemed to be calling for help. Our recording equipment captured the voices clearly, but audio analysis couldn't determine their source. The sounds appeared to be coming from within the stone itself, which was impossible. More disturbing still, when we played the recordings for the families of the missing children, several parents broke down, insisting they recognized their children's voices in the mysterious sounds. The FBI officially classified the case as unexplained phenomena and sealed the site permanently. A concrete cap was poured over the entire chamber, and the area was declared off-limits to civilians. But that didn't stop the reports. Hikers and hunters in the area continued to report strange sounds, unexplained lights, and the feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. As for the 12 children who disappeared that night in 1995, they were never found. No bodies, no additional evidence, no closure for their families. The journal and the underground chamber had given us glimpses into something horrible, but they hadn't brought the children home. In my official report, I concluded that the children had likely been murdered as part of some kind of ritual, but I couldn't prove it, and I couldn't explain how or why. The families deserved better answers than I could give them. Emma Rodriguez's mother still calls me sometimes, asking if there have been any new developments. I always tell her I'm still working on it, even though the case has been officially closed. Some promises are too important to break, even when you know you might never be able to keep them. What haunts me most isn't just the mystery of what happened to those 12 children. It's the possibility that whatever took them is still out there, still hungry, still waiting for the next opportunity to feed what the journal called the ancient promise. The symbols we found in that chamber were old, older than anything else in the region. They suggested that this evil had roots that went back centuries, possibly millennia. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, thinking about that valley, about those whispering pines and the silence that seemed to swallow everything. I think about 12 children who went to sleep under the stars and never saw another sunrise. I think about families who still set places at their tables for children who will never come home. The official investigation is closed, but for me, it will never be over. Somewhere in the darkness of that Montana wilderness lies the truth about what happened on July 15th, 1995. Somewhere in the whispers of those ancient pines are the voices of 12 children who deserve justice. And somewhere in the shadows cast by those symbols carved in stone is an evil that may still be waiting for its next opportunity to strike. The case might have remained closed forever if not for what happened in the summer of 2021. I had moved on to other investigations, though the Whispering Pines case still haunted my dreams. That's when I received a call that changed everything again. A family camping in Glacier National Park, about 60 miles from the old campsite, had reported their 8-year-old daughter missing. The circumstances were eerily familiar. Little Amy Chen, again, no relation to me, though the coincidence sent chills down my spine, had disappeared from her family's tent during the night. Just like at Whispering Pines, there were no signs of struggle, no footprints, no evidence of what had taken her. Her parents, David and Lisa Chen, had been sleeping less than 3 feet away and heard nothing unusual. When I arrived at the scene, the similarities were impossible to ignore. The campsite was in a valley surrounded by dense pine trees. The terrain was rocky and isolated, accessible only by hiking trails. And just like that night in 1995, other campers nearby had slept peacefully through whatever had happened. Amy had simply vanished, as if she had never existed at all, but this time we had advantages the 1995 investigation didn't. Modern forensic techniques, better communication systems, and most importantly, knowledge of what we had found at Whispering Pines. I immediately requested ground-penetrating radar and a full archaeological survey of the area. If there was another underground chamber here, we were going to find it. The search for Amy lasted 6 days. Rangers combed every trail, every cave, every possible hiding place within a 50-mile radius. Search dogs picked up her scent near a cluster of ancient pine trees, but lost it abruptly, just as they had 26 years earlier. Helicopters equipped with thermal imaging found nothing. It was as if the wilderness had swallowed another child whole. On the 7th day, our ground-penetrating radar detected an anomaly beneath a grove of trees about half a mile from the Chen family's campsite. The readings showed what appeared to be another carved chamber, similar in size and shape to the one we had found at Whispering Pines. My blood ran cold as I realized we might be dealing with something much larger and more organized than we had ever imagined. The excavation team worked around the clock to reach the chamber. What they found was both horrifying and familiar. Another altar, carved with the same ancient symbols. another set of small cavities carved into the stone floor, and hidden beneath a loose stone, another metal box containing a journal and a small hair ribbon that Amy's mother confirmed belonged to her daughter. This journal was different from the first one. The handwriting was the same precise script, but the entries dated back only to 2019. Someone had been watching this location, studying the camping patterns, waiting for the right opportunity. The final entry was dated the night Amy disappeared, and it contained the same chilling words. "The child is ready, the woods are hungry, tonight we feed the ancient promise." But this journal contained something else, a map. Hand-drawn but incredibly detailed, it showed the locations of 12 similar sites scattered across Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming. Each location was marked with the same symbols we had found carved into the altars. Some sites were marked with dates going back decades. Others had recent dates or were marked as pending. I stared at that map with growing horror, realizing that what we had discovered wasn't just two isolated incidents. This was evidence of a network, a systematic operation that had been taking children from remote wilderness areas for generations. Someone or some group was using these ancient sites for purposes I didn't want to contemplate. The implications were staggering. If the map was accurate, dozens of children had disappeared over the years, all in locations that were too remote and isolated for proper investigation. The disappearances would have been attributed to accidents, animal attacks, or simply getting lost in the wilderness. No one would have connected them because they happened in different states, different jurisdictions, sometimes years apart. I immediately contacted the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit and requested a full investigation into missing children reports from all the areas marked on the map. What they found confirmed my worst fears. Over the past 40 years, 37 children had disappeared from or near the mapped locations under circumstances that matched the pattern we had identified. Some of the cases had been closed as accidental deaths when no bodies were found. Others remained open, but inactive. A few had been attributed to family abductions or custody disputes. But when viewed together, when the pattern became clear, it was obvious that something far more sinister had been happening in the wilderness of the American Northwest. The investigation expanded rapidly. Teams were dispatched to examine each of the sites marked on the map. What they found was consistent and terrifying. Every location contained evidence of human activity going back decades or longer. Some had partial structures hidden underground. Others had carved symbols on trees or rocks. All of them felt wrong in ways that experienced investigators couldn't articulate. At 3 of the sites, teams found additional metal boxes containing journals and personal effects from missing children. The journals all contained the same type of entries, detailed observations followed by that same final notation about feeding the ancient promise. The handwriting varied, suggesting multiple authors, but the methodology was identical. Someone was training others to continue this horrific work. The investigation team grew to include archaeologists, anthropologists, and experts in cult behavior. The symbols found at the sites didn't match any known religious or cultural markings from Native American tribes in the region. They appeared to be much older, possibly predating known human settlement of the area. Some experts speculated they might be related to prehistoric ritual practices, but no one could definitively translate their meaning. What became clear was that whoever was responsible for these disappearances wasn't just a random killer or kidnapper. This was organized, methodical, and had been going on for far longer than anyone had imagined. The perpetrators had chosen locations that were remote enough to avoid detection, but accessible enough for them to reach with their victims. They had studied each site, understood the local terrain, and developed methods for moving children without leaving evidence. As we pieced together the timeline, a disturbing pattern emerged. The disappearances had accelerated over the past 2 decades. Where once they might have happened every few years, recent entries in the journals suggested they were now occurring annually, or even more frequently. Something was driving an increased appetite for whatever ritual was being performed at these sites. The breakthrough came when one of our forensic accountants noticed something in the financial records of the lumber company that had owned the Whispering Pines property. The company had been purchased in 1998 by a holding corporation based in Denver. Further investigation revealed that the same holding corporation owned or had purchased land near 6 of the other sites marked on the map. Tracing the ownership led us to a man named Dr. Nathaniel Ashford, a retired anthropology professor who had written extensively about prehistoric ritual practices in North America. Ashford had purchased the various properties through different shell companies over a period of 20 years, always focusing on remote wilderness areas with specific geological features. When we obtained a warrant to search Ashford's Denver home, what we found was like stepping into the mind of someone completely detached from humanity. His basement had been converted into a study room lined with detailed maps, photographs of all the sites, and journals dating back to the 1980s. The walls were covered with enlarged photographs of the symbol carvings, and he had been working to create what appeared to be a complete translation of their meaning. But Ashford himself was nowhere to be found. According to his neighbors, he had left his house 3 days after Amy Chen's disappearance and hadn't been seen since. His car was found abandoned at a trailhead near Yellowstone National Park, but extensive searches of the area turned up no trace of him. It was as if he had vanished into the same wilderness that had claimed so many children. In Ashford's house, we found a computer containing detailed records of every disappearance going back to 1979. He had been meticulously documenting each case, including photographs of the victims, details about their families, and notes about the selection criteria he used to choose targets. The files revealed that he had been working with at least 3 other individuals, though their identities were hidden behind code names. The most disturbing discovery was a file labeled The Great Awakening, which contained Ashford's translation of the symbols found at the sites. According to his research, the symbols told the story of an ancient entity that required child sacrifices to maintain its dormant state. The ritual sites were described as feeding points, where offerings could be made to keep this entity sleeping beneath the earth. Ashford's notes suggested that he believed the entity was beginning to awaken after centuries of dormancy, and that more frequent sacrifices were needed to keep it contained. His journal entries from 2020 and 2021 showed increasing desperation and references to the signs, unexplained seismic activity, changes in wildlife behavior, and strange atmospheric phenomena near the ritual sites. The investigation into Dr. Ashford's network continued for another year. We identified 2 of his accomplices through financial records and digital forensics. Both had been graduate students who had worked with him decades earlier and had been recruited into his beliefs about the ancient entity. One had committed suicide when he learned we were closing in. The other was arrested but died in custody under mysterious circumstances before he could be properly interrogated. Despite our efforts, we never found Ashford himself, nor did we ever recover Amy Chen or any of the other missing children. The ritual sites were sealed and placed under federal protection, but I know that didn't end the threat. Ashford's research suggested there were other sites we hadn't discovered yet, other places where the ancient promise demanded to be fed. Amy's parents never stopped hoping she would come home. David Chen took early retirement and spent his remaining years hiking every trail in the region, searching for any sign of his daughter. Lisa Chen started a foundation to help other families of missing children, but the grief eventually consumed her. She passed away in 2023, still wearing the necklace with Amy's photo that she had put on the day her daughter disappeared. As I write this in 2024, the official investigation is closed, but the work continues. I've received reports of new disappearances that match the pattern. New sites that show evidence of the same symbols. The network Ashford built may have been dismantled, but the knowledge he uncovered about these ancient places continues to attract others who share his twisted beliefs. Sometimes I wonder if we're fighting something that can't be defeated, only contained. The symbols carved in those chambers are older than recorded history. The entity Ashford believed he was serving may be nothing more than the delusion of a sick mind, but the children who fed his delusions were real. Their lives were real. Their family's pain is real. The wilderness of the American Northwest is vast and largely unexplored. There are thousands of valleys like the one that held Camp Whispering Pines, thousands of remote areas where something unspeakable could happen without anyone ever knowing. The thought keeps me awake at night, wondering how many other children have been swallowed by those dark places, how many other families are still waiting for answers that may never come. What haunts me most is the possibility that this isn't over, that somewhere in those endless mountains and forests, the ancient symbols are still being carved, new journals are still being written, and the hunger that drove Ashford and his followers continues to demand satisfaction. The darkness we uncovered goes back centuries, and I fear it will continue long after all of us are gone.